But we cannot ignore history. We have to make obeisance to history. The history is that from 1960 up to the time Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, he was a despot. He was not good for Ghana. He was terrible for Ghana.
It is between 1960 to 1966 that Nkrumah built over 100 industries and worked hard to industrialize Ghana. It is in this same period that he built Ghana's only motorway and also built the Akosa Dam to provide electricity to the entire country. So how can it be said that Nkrumah was terrible for Ghana? Which despot provides free education from primary up to university level for his people?
Preventive Detention Act was created in 1958. You might not think of it as a bad law. It is only the usage that you can criticize. Because what happened is that Nkrumah had been attacked by a bomb. And it was becoming very scary between Nkrumah and the opposition. The violence was growing on the part of the opposition, I must say. And Nkrumah needed something that will allow the intelligence agencies to work. So that's why PDA was set up. So in fact, if you look at the usage of PDA, between 1958, when it was set up, and about 1961, it was minimal. But from 1961 to 1964, the PDA was railroading everywhere and every home was afraid. This was the state of affairs in Ghana.
First, it is admitted that there was a justification for the introduction of the PDA, which is the terrorist attacks by the opposition to Nkrumah. Then it is claimed that the PDA was railroading everywhere. Let us assume this is true. The question to ask is, what caused all this? Well, I will tell you. The bombing incidents increased dramatically in the early 1960s, but this is not said. For instance, on the 9th of September 1962, a bomb was thrown into a crowd numbering over 2,000 just outside President Nkrumah's residence. 2 people were killed, with at least 63 persons injured. This was followed just 12 days later by another bomb explosion in Accra, which killed 3 people and left about 120 others injured. This was the 3rd bombing incident since the 1st of August that year, when a bomb was thrown at President Nkrumah in Kulungugu. In fact, in 1961, the visit of Queen Elizabeth to Ghana nearly did not happen due to a series of bombing incidents. The British government understandably tried to discourage her from going to Ghana. The visit only happened because the Queen insisted on it. So this is the important context that is missing from the narrative. Somehow, Kwame Nkrumah is demonized for rightly taking decisive action to deal with what was essentially terrorism. But what was the Nkrumah government supposed to do when the president himself was being targeted and innocent Ghanaians, including children, were being murdered by these terrorists?
The situation where you could be arrested and put in custody without the intervention of a court.
Not just without the intervention of the courts, but on the basis that the Minister for Interior is thinking in his mind that you are preparing to do something wrong. This is a fundamental departure from the processes of the jurisprudence of the criminal court. It's just a fundamental and a wicked departure from it. That somebody can think in his head that he suspects that you are doing something wrong and then you are picked up and arrested. This was the state of affairs in Ghana at the time.
Extraordinary times, as they say, call for extraordinary measures. We all saw how the US Congress passed the Patriot Act, which some said infringed on the constitutional rights of Americans. But national security considerations trumped all such concerns. Also, arrests under the PDA were mainly based on police investigations and intelligence, and not simply on the thinking of the Interior Minister.
Because if you look at the amendment of the Constitution, Nkrumah had made himself a life president.
Correct.
And he had also made CPP the only legitimate party. Now, this is the situation that led many African countries to civil wars in the 80s. Because these leaders in the 60s, a lot of these Nkrumah students who had won independence for their various countries through Nkrumah's efforts, had also become despots and were thinking like that. So Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia and all of those people, they were there till the 80s. Ofebuanye, they were there. And part of the reason why Ghana did not experience those civil wars in the late 80s and the 90s was Kotoka.
It is simply inaccurate to claim that the one-party system led to civil wars in any African country in the 1980s or 1990s. Zambia has never had a civil war. Neither has Tanzania, Guinea, Kenya, nor Malawi, all countries that were one-party states. Côte d'Ivoire is the only country mentioned that had a civil war, but this in fact only happened in 2002, after the transition to a multi-party system. Between 1960 and 1990, when the country was a one-party state under Hufebuani, there was no civil war in Côte d'Ivoire. It is important to state for the records that Phyllis Hufebuani was not a student of Nkrumah at any time. In fact, if anything, he was probably the staunchest opponent of Nkrumah in Africa. Hufebuani was a right-wing African leader who was ideologically opposed to Nkrumah and yet he also favored the one-party system. In fact, he made Cote d'Ivoire a one-party state in 1960, 4 years before Kwame Nkrumah. What must be properly understood is the context of those times. In the 1960s, the one-party system was widely seen by many newly independent African countries as the most favorable option, as it fostered national unity. The logic was that it made great sense to have a system that brings all the people together to build the country. Also, who was better qualified to lead a newly independent country than the party that had led the independence struggle? It must also be noted that Ghana was a de facto one-party state since 1951, as the CPP had won every election with a wide margin, and the opposition never managed to mount a serious challenge. It is in fact for this reason that the opposition resorted to terrorism, as they saw that the CPP was unbeatable through the democratic process of elections. The terrorism of the opposition, the huge popularity of the CPP, as demonstrated by their election victories, and the need to foster national unity, all gave good reason to opt for the one-party system. I mean, think about this. How can it be said that the best way forward for a poor, underdeveloped, newly independent country is to essentially divide its citizens into two opposing groups who will constantly be at each other's necks? This is essentially what the multi-party system does. It gives rise to division and also makes it impossible to have national unity. And you don't have to look far to see this. Just look at Ghana today.
How do we test Kotoka's fidelity to the nation, and he and his friends? So they decided to do a coup. They took Nkrumah out, and they began to rearrange Ghana on the path of another constitutional democracy.
How can this be said when the CPP and all pro-Nkrumah groups and individuals were banned from contesting in the 1969 elections?
I'm sure that if you take Nkrumah's brain at 1954, he will support the coup. If in 1954 Nkrumah will support the 1966 coup.
On what basis is this claim being made when Kwame Nkrumah never opposed the one-party system or supported the murder of innocent people as happened during the 1966 coup?
Now, this is the state of affairs, and Kotoka was the rescuer. So we grow up later on and see coups, and we say he's also another coup maker. No, but he was a rescuer.
What exactly did he rescue Ghanaians from? From industrialization and self-reliance, or from free education and free textbooks? On this claim, I would like to share with you the assessment of Malcolm X, a man who can rightly be described as a truth teller, when he visited Ghana in 1964. When asked in an interview after his visit to both Ghana and Nigeria about how both countries compare to each other in terms of development, Malcolm said, "Nigeria is one of the richest countries on the African continent, one of the most beautiful of the African countries, but by the same token, you will find beggars there, you find poverty there, you don't find new cities. You find beggars and poverty in Lagos, which you don't see in Ghana." And 2 months after the 1966 coup, Ervin Markowitz, in an article titled "Ghana Without Nkrumah," wrote that Ghana was neither a terrorized nor poverty-stricken country, and yet Kotoka is being described as a rescuer. How did he rescue Ghanaians? And what did he rescue them from?
Now see what happened. Nkrumah was popular. Yes, he was. In 1951, he won the election. 54, he won the election. 56, he won the election. You cannot win 3 successive elections in those days if you are not popular. But here is the charge. In 1960, Nkrumah knew that if he ran an election on universal adult suffrage, he might not win. So he decided to obscure the election and call it a plebiscite and do something funny.
There was no obscuring by Kwame Nkrumah. What happened was that in 1960, a new constitution was to be introduced, but this had to be voted upon by the people, hence the idea of a plebiscite. It was then decided that the election for Ghana's first president should take place at the same time, alongside the plebiscite. For this reason, voting was to be carried out in every constituency, and the presidential candidate who won the majority of constituencies was to be declared the winner of the election. At the end of the election, Kwame Nkrumah had won in all but 2 constituencies, with 89.07%. J.B. Dankwa, the opponent of Nkrumah in this election, only won in 2 constituencies and had 10.93%. On the matter of elections being held on different days, it must be noted that 1960 wasn't the first time this happened. In fact, this was a practice in the previous elections before 1957. It was primarily because there were a very limited number of civil servants in those times, as they were the ones who supervised voting all over the country. It then became necessary to hold elections on different days so as to ensure that there will be enough civil servants at any given time to supervise the voting. Another reason was to also make sure that there were enough police officers to prevent any malpractices or violence, So clearly, this was no new invention by Kwame Nkrumah, as it is being made to look. More importantly, the dates for the election were fixed by a resolution in the National Assembly 1 month before the election. The fact that the election was going to be held over 3 days was known, and all of this was agreed to by the J.B. Danquah-led opposition.
Election 64. Everyone was waiting for the election. What happened? The proper coup d'etat. Nkrumah overthrew the constitution as a president with the parliament. They said that we will not have any election anymore. CPP is the only party. All other political parties are banned.
There is no mention here of the 1964 constitutional referendum, where the people of Ghana voted to approve the amendments that were put forward. How can Nkrumah be said to have overthrown the constitution when he followed due process and allowed the people to decide democratically?
A parliament that was elected in 1956 and no election of the parliament until 1966 when the coup came. 10 years of MPs in the house, no election. This is the state of affairs in Ghana.
Before the 1960 presidential election, the government decided that if the results of the election showed that there will be little change in the balance of parties in the assembly, then they will take it as a mandate to extend the life of the existing parliament. With the opposition winning just 2 out of 104 seats, it was even very likely that their number of seats in the assembly would have been reduced from the 33 it used to be to just 2. So if anything, the decision by the Nkrumah government benefited the opposition. The intention of the Nkrumah government was to retain a sizable group of opposition members in the assembly, who, if an election had been held, were unlikely to have been retained by the people.
Election 64. Everyone was waiting for the election. What happened? The proper coup d'etat. Nkrumah overthrew the constitution as a president with the parliament. They said that we will not have any election anymore. CPP is the only party. All other political parties are banned.
This is another claim that is made without any evidence whatsoever. What was the status of the opposition in 1964? If they had failed woefully to mount a challenge to Nkrumah since 1951 up to 1960, how were they suddenly going to win power in 1964 when industries were springing up everywhere in Ghana?
For me, I just think that whether Kotoka is a hero or a villain, I want to say a few things for the viewers and the listeners to make a judgment. There is a saying that goes that the only difference between a hero and a villain is that the villain chooses to use that power in a way that is selfish and hurts other people. Can we put Kotoka in that context? If you want to call him a villain, did he use the power selfishly to hurt other people, or was he a liberator at the time?
Just 21 days after the coup, E.K. Kotoka wrote to the finance ministry demanding that all members of the Ghana army be granted a total exemption from paying for water and electricity, and also from paying income tax. That was not all. He also demanded a total exemption from paying conservancy and quartering charges. As commander of the Ghana army, Kotoka was clearly going to be the biggest beneficiary of these exemptions. So how can anyone say that he did not act for his personal benefit? At the time Kotoka was making these demands, state-owned factories and farms were being abandoned and workers were being dismissed by the NLC because they claimed Ghana was broke. And yet, look at all the exemptions Kotoka demanded for.
What you need to understand is this. Kwame Nkrumah, the greatest president we ever had, got to a point where his mind messed up. Many people, after they survive an assassination attempt, change.
Where is the evidence to justify making such an outrageous claim? There was none provided. Yes, those who suffer traumatic events are affected by it. That is not in doubt. But does that make it right to claim that his mind was messed up without providing any evidence? Kwame Nkrumah always acted within the bounds of the Constitution. Therefore, it is highly unfair that he and his government's decisive action to deal with terrorism is being used to attack him in this manner. I mean, you should try to imagine it yourself, and you probably cannot. A bomb being detonated in Ghana, not once, not twice, but on many occasions, killing many people, including children. Yes, even children were not spared by the Anti-Nkrumah terrorists, but it is Nkrumah who gets demonized when this period is spoken about, and those who do so never give the full context. At which point exactly and how did Nkrumah change? Because the PDA was introduced in 1958 after a plot to assassinate Nkrumah was exposed. This is after a bomb had been thrown into his house in Accra in 1955. And what did he change from and to what?
A time came when Kwame Nkrumah became an insufferable despot. What I mean is, he will not let anybody breathe in this country. Ask your grandfather, they will tell you.
This is another very outrageous claim that was made. And the only thing we are told is to ask our grandfathers. Okay, I've asked my grandfather and he said Kwame Nkrumah was a great leader and the best Ghana has had. Now what? In fact, I have sat down with many elders who witnessed the times, and they all say the same thing. Nkrumah will not let anybody breathe in this country. Is it by building factories all over, or by his massive investment in agriculture to provide them with jobs? Or is it the unprecedented infrastructural development? How can anyone say this? And he offers no basis for saying this, but tells us to ask our grandfathers. But who has said Nkrumah was perfect? Nkrumah himself has never claimed to be perfect. So how is this even relevant?
What General I.K and Kotoka did, I don't agree that they were villains. No. Considering the state of our country at that time.
What was the state of the country at the time? Nobody denies that there were economic problems 1 or 2 years before the coup. In fact, Nkrumah himself talks about this at length in his book, Dark Days in Ghana. But what is also undeniable is the fact that much of the economic problems were orchestrated by external forces in a bid to turn Ghanaians against Kwame Nkrumah and to create the grounds for the coup.
The state of the trajectory of our politics, it's not reflective of the dynamism, the plurality of our culture, where everybody in a multi-tribal, multicultural environment should also find its place and space. Nkrumah closed that door for whatever reasons.
How exactly did Kwame Nkrumah close this door? I am honestly confused. How does a one-party system prevent anyone from expressing their culture in any way? Is it then to say that political parties are vehicles for promoting tribal interests? Do we not attack politicians today when they make tribalistic comments? So what exactly is Nkrumah being accused of here? The only door Nkrumah closed is the door of tribalism with the Avoidance of Discrimination Act in 1957. And what has a political system got to do with cultural plurality? How exactly does MPP and NDC today express cultural plurality of Ghanaians? Someone needs to help me understand how this is something to hold against Nkrumah.
So Kotoka was not a villain. He helped reset and help restore democracy, because democracy was truly lost. Nobody could debate these things unnecessarily.
What is more democratic than making it possible for your people to have education for free? Which oppressive leader will educate all of his people? What is more democratic than industrialization to transform Ghana and uplift the living standards of Ghanaians? Kwame Nkrumah built estates all over Ghana to provide housing for ordinary Ghanaians, built the Akosa Dam to electrify the entire country. This was democracy in action. There is nothing more democratic than providing the basic needs of the people. This attempt to make everything about elections as if without it, there can be no progress or democracy is a fallacy, and no need to look far to see this. Ghanaians have been queuing every 4 years for 33 years now. What do they have to show for it? At this point, I need to call on you to please consider supporting our work financially so we can keep this going, as it takes a lot to make these videos. So if you see any value in our content, please consider supporting. The links to do so are in the description box of this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it to others. It goes a long way. Asante sana.